We are live.
Thank you. The November 3rd, 2021 regular meeting of the West Hartford Town Plan and Zoning Commission and duly designated Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency is called to order. My name is Kevin Ahern, Chair of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's virtual meeting. For the record, I'd like to note that the required meeting agenda and application materials are all available on the town website. This meeting is being conducted in a virtual format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, as amended by Public Act 21-2, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings virtually. Will the town planner please call the roll?
Commissioner Gillette.
Here.
Commissioner Prestige.
Here.
Commissioner Ahern.
Here.
Present for staff is Todd Dumay, Town Planner, myself, Ryan Pudlick, Associate Planner, Robert Goslin, Planning and Zoning Technician. Absent from the Commission are Andrea Gomes and Gordon Binkhurst. That is the roll, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dumay. So for the record, I'd like to note that we have a quorum of the Commission tonight. Commission members and town staff are participating by WebEx. Members of the public can view the meeting live on West Hartford Community Television at www.whctv.org and www.youtube/WHCTV5. The meeting is also being recorded for on-demand viewing and will be available on the town's website for at least 45 days. Because of the virtual format of this meeting, there are some special rules and procedures that I need to cover before I begin. First, I ask all participants to mute your device when you are not speaking. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order that I see hands raised at the appropriate point in the meeting. If you are not participating by audio only, or if I do not call on you and the debate is ending, then unmute your phone and let me know that I can recognize you. Second, all speakers must make a good faith effort to state the person's name and title at the outset of each occasion that such person participates in the meeting. Third, all votes must be taken by roll call unless the vote is unanimous. So with that, will the town planner please proceed with the first matter on our agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first items on our agenda this evening are approval of our meeting minutes. First set of minutes are from our special meeting on Wednesday, October 7th.
This is Kevin Ahern, Chair. Mr. Dumay, I believe we do not have a sufficient number of members to vote on this item. And then we will need to pass this to our next meeting.
That is correct. I'll note that for the record. The next set of minutes for voting and acceptance are Tuesday, October 19th.
Mr. Dumay, I do believe we have a quorum for that. Myself, Ms. Gillette, and Mr. Prestige. Do we have a motion on the minutes?
Motion to approve?
Thank you. We have a motion. The motion is on the table. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, let me try your minds. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Next up, Mr. Dumay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'd like to note that Commissioner Kaplan has now joined the meeting. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I assume we'll have him seated on all matters this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Dumay. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair again. I concur. He would be seated on all matters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is communication. This is the review and hopefully approval of the 2022 TPZ meeting and filing dates. We are required to set this agenda and provide it to the town clerk by the end of the month.
Thank you, Mr. Dumay. I would like to note, to the other commissioners, I made a communication to Todd. You guys have always kindly moved the November meeting to Wednesday instead of Monday, so that because I'm working the hotline for the Elections Commission, that I don't have to sort of the Monday, Tuesday. But then it turns out it's Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm a little exhausted anyway. I just noted that because the election is on the 8th of November and the meeting is scheduled for the 9th, we could consider having this meeting the week prior on a Wednesday on the 2nd if the commissioners were amenable to it, but only if you guys were okay with that. Any concern? Is there a motion that needs to be made, Mr. Dumais?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we usually motion to accept the meeting schedule and transmit it to the clerk. I would like to just note for the commission's attention, there's a little asterisk for our January, February, and March meetings. I just did that because we're under the assumption that we're meeting in this virtual format, so I noted the agenda. If something changes and we go back to in-person, we would just then brand those as special meetings because we would be inconsistent with this scheduling. But since at this time, at least through April, that was the direction we provided the clerk. That's why you see the asterisk with the notation for the January 3rd, February 7th, and March 7th meeting dates. Again, if something were to change, we meet back in person, we would make sure to reserve the council chambers in the event that we do go back to person. I just wanted to note that out to your attention because we haven't done that in the past.
This is Kevin Ahern, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dumais. So if I could, and I want to give the members the opportunity to review the calendar as long as they need. But if anyone would be so kind to make the motion with the amendment of the November meeting to change it to November 2nd.
I move we move the November meeting to the 2nd.
And so I think you can make it all part of one motion to approve the calendar with the amendment.
Oh. Yeah, okay. What he said.
Thank you. So we have the motion to approve this calendar, but amend the November meeting to November 2nd. So we have the motion on the table. Do we have any discussion? Right, seeing none, let me try your minds. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. So that is 4-0. The item passes. Next up, Mr. Dumais.
Mr. Chairman, the next item on our agenda is a communication item for 4 Banbury, application inland wetland 1129 of Martin Ringy on behalf of Nancy and Don Hunt, requesting to open and immediately continue the public hearing for the associated wetland application. Suggest a new public hearing date to be December 6th. Just as a point of order, this item is scheduled for hearing. It's item number 7 on your agenda. So this is a request where you would typically receive that motion, and then when we get to that item on the agenda, open and immediately continue it without testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. So this is Kevin Ahern, Chair. So just to clarify, we need to take no action at this moment on this item.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. All right, then the next item up is item number 3 under new business. Mr. Dumais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 3 on the agenda is 637 New Park Avenue, the Gastro Park application special use permit 1341 of Tate Norden, requesting TPC review and look back of compliance with conditions for the special use permit 1341 and modifications to the original approval, originally approved on September 4th, 2019 for a food truck park, which included space for up to 4 food trucks, indoor dining, bar, games areas, outdoor dining, and patio. Submitted for TPC receipt on November 3rd. Suggest required public hearing be scheduled for December 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. We have this item proposed public hearing date is December 6th. We have a motion on this item. Thank you, Ms. Gillette.
I move we set the hearing for December 6th.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. So the motion has been made. We need no second. Do we have any discussion, Ms. Gillette? Mr. Dumais.
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to preempt any possible discussion. We will be sure to refer these out to police, fire, health, engineering, and zoning, our standard set of referrals to see if there have been any issues identified by any of those agencies. And I just want to point out this application, this happens from time to time. They are requesting some very minor modifications to their original approval. And since this is a public hearing process, it gives them an opportunity to do both the look back and modifying the original approval. So It's just a more efficient way to kind of facilitate such a request.
This is Kevin Ernst here again. Thank you, Mr. Dumay. And I just note, Ms. Gillette, you had your hand raised, but it looked the way that you were nodding. Okay.
It was about the police and fire referrals.
Perfect. And I'd say for the record, we would apply that to all of these going forward. Anything from either Mr. Prestige or Mr. Kaplan? No, seeing that. All right, let me try your minds. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Right. Those opposed? All right, the ayes have it 4-0. Item number 4, Mr. Dumay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 4, 589, 591 New Park Avenue. Application Special Use Permit 1369 of Brett Bowen on behalf of Sarjac Partners LLC, requesting approval of a special use permit to have a new place of worship in the rear building on site, submitted for TPC receipt on November 3rd. Suggest required public hearing be scheduled for December 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Dumay. So requested approval of special use permit. It is a required public hearing suggested for December 6th. Do we have a motion on this item? We have a motion on this item. Mr. Prestige.
Move to approve. Or move to set for hearing on December 6th.
I like your can-do spirit, though. I like that. We just kind of blow past all of it and just go straight to approval.
We do have comments, though.
Okay.
as opposed to
Please,
motion.
Mr.
Questions
Prestige.
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Dumay. Mr. Dumay, with regards to designating this property for use or allowing for a new place of worship. I'm not too sure what the definition of a place of worship is. In advance of our meet, you can answer now, but at least in advance of our meeting next month, if you'd be able to help inform me on the designation of a new place of worship, what might that carry with it with regards to any privileges, with regards to zoning, town services, so on and so forth. Or perhaps there's none, but just want to double check. Thank you.
Mr. Dumay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the place of worship request, it's a permitted use in this, which is an industrially zoned district, but that use is approved only vis-a-vis special use permit requirements. So given that it's a special use permit, you'd be approving that use, which would run with the land, and it'd be subject to your findings, similar to any special use permit that would come before you on a regular basis. We don't often do churches or places of worship. In terms of the other part of your question, Mr. Prestige, in terms of how is this defined, it's not defined as a place of worship in our regulations. I'm just checking to see. No, we don't have a specific definition that's called out in our definition section. Rather, it's only referenced in the permitted main uses in the zone, and it's noted as place of worship.
And if I can follow up, Mr. Hearn. Through you,
Please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dumay, so in particular, and to your point, you hit the nail on the head. I'm not used to, identifying or declaring a permitting a house of worship. But certainly don't have anything against it. It's talk about a fundamental community, a positive fundamental community activity. Nonetheless, I am interested in very specifically if something is designated as a house of worship, if it carries with it certain privileges for zoning or town services, so on and so forth. I just want to make sure that if they are designated, if it is permitted, we're not, by accident, giving this site privilege to something we didn't consider. Thank you,
Mr. Prestige. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe the way to look at it from your perspective is this is just one of many of the enumerated permitted main uses. In this instance, as I indicated, it's actually special use permit approval in every district in which we allow them, which is all of our zoning districts. So there's no special zoning right other than it's considered a special use permit. There are other building and other code implications when places of worship get approved. I'm not aware of any other special treatment or services that this particular type of approval would afford itself, nor am I aware of any type of tax specific treatment that a place of worship would get, in that I think they're just a tenant in this instance and not the owner of the property. But we could explore that when we bring it to hearing next month. If you have any specific questions around any particular non-zoning code related issues related to a place of worship. From a zoning standpoint, it's essentially just this is a permitted use, doesn't meet your standard and criteria under the approval process for a special use permit in the zone.
Yeah, I think it would be, at least from my perspective, it would be healthy for us to know, you know, as a house of worship, you know, what sort of construction, what can they build there? It's industrial, it's sure it's accepting of a lot of different things, but nonetheless, I would like to know what the possibilities are. So thanks.
Mr. Dume.
We'll gather that information, Mr. Prestidge, and make sure we have that available. We'll also do a little research. I'll have Mr. Pudlick look. I know there have been other houses of worship, place of worship approved in our industrial zones, and maybe we can pull out an example or two for you to see from a past approval and see what that looks like and how it changes the use of a property.
If I may, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Dume, there's actually a place of worship that was approved on this very same property at some point, I think, in the recent past, and the applicant's application was modeled off of that one. So it currently exists on the property, and this is another tenant that's going to occupy another building or a portion of another building on the property, but nevertheless also a place of worship. This one is at a substantially smaller, smaller membership group than the other one. So just to add that little bit of background there.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Prestidge. Any other questions regarding this item? If I could clarify, was a motion made? I can't recall now. Did you make
I made a motion to, made a motion to set it for hearing on December 6th. Yep.
So we have the motion on the table. Do we have any other further discussion? All right, seeing none, let me try our minds. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Are you raising your hand?
I had two minor comments on the materials that were presented, but they're very minor and they could be taken up next time. It's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. What is your vote on this item?
It was an aye.
Thank you. All right, so we have a 4-0 on this item. Item number 5, Mr. Dume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 5, 47 Oak Ridge Lane, application inland wetland 1160. Requesting approval of an inland wetland and watercourse permit to conduct certain regulated activities which may have an adverse impact on a wetland regulated area. The applicant is proposing to construct an approximately 263.5 square foot deck off the back of the house using 4 helical pile footings. The proposed work is within the 150-foot upland review area and adjacent to the mapped wetland soils. Submitted for agency receipt on November 7th, presented for a determination of significance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pudlick and let him describe this application in a little bit more detail, and then he'll be able to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dume. So as Todd noted, the applicant is interested in installing a roughly 260 square foot deck on the back of his client's home. The property is almost fully encumbered by mapped wetland soils, at least right up to the back of the house. The photographs that he presented along with the application would seem to indicate that these are likely not wetland soils, at least not in the area where the deck is being built. Rather than encourage this particular applicant to go for a map amendment, given the limited scope of the project, we suggested a regulated activity permit only would be the right approach here. And the way that they are handling the actual construction of the deck is by using helical piles, which are a little bit different than traditional footings in the sense that they are literally screwed into the ground by a small machine that's wheeled in there. And so there's no actual excavation or digging that goes on with these helical piles. The machine comes in, they screw them into the ground, and they are immediately able to take on and support weight. And so there's no waiting time for the contractor for cement curing or anything along those lines. And then more importantly for the agency is that there is no impact to the adjacent soils. No need for stockpiling, nothing along those lines. So this should be an extremely low impact activity in this particular property.
Thank you, Mr. Budlick. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair. Do we have any questions for the staff on this item?
I do.
Mr. Prestige and then Ms. Gillette.
Thanks, Mr. Hearn. Mr. Hearn, through you to staff. Question. Absolutely. Thanks for the clarification about the excavation or lack thereof needed for the pilings. Could you describe, from what you can understand, the amount of disturbance in its entirety for this site? And yeah, let's just start with that. And so I'm talking about ground disturbance where they'll be breaking soil. So aside from, I understand the piles that get drilled in, we can forgo that I understand that, but how about the rest of the construction of the deck?
You're muted, Mr. Budlick.
I apologize, I was muted. Through you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Prestige, there really should be no other ground disturbance. The machine that's used has, imagine something similar to like a golf cart that comes down there with wheels rather than tracks in this particular instance. And once the piles are screwed into the ground, they immediately start building the deck with the wood frame at that point, and that's it. So there's no additional excavation or any kind of ground disturbance that's required.
And follow-up question on that, Mr. Hearn, if that's okay.
Please.
Have they determined the limits of construction? Or if they have not determined the limits of construction or activity associated with this, would you be able to speculate if they would be able to accept as a condition? If we could do that, if we determine, can we set conditions if it's not? Yeah, we can. To set as a condition that all activity must take place on the mown lawn.
I'm sure that, again, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Prestige, I suspect that would not be an issue at all for the applicant in this case. They have no intention of building beyond the scope of what they've shown on their plans there. So I suspect that would be a condition that they wouldn't have any concern with.
Okay, I'm set. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair again. Ms. Gillette.
I'm really leaning towards not significant on this. And I think it's wonderful to see new ways of dealing with these kinds of issues in wetland areas and making it easy and painless. It appears that a good portion of this is going to be built over an area which currently has like a brick patio surface on it that's in fairly poor shape. I guess one of my questions, here was my question, is the treatment of the ground underneath the deck. The deck can have the Trex that is smack up against each other, and there's very little permeability because there are no cracks. And with Trex, there's very little expansion, et cetera, built in. So there's very little surface crack for the water to go down underneath the deck. And I guess what I'm looking for is some thought about, because it is in a wetland area, or at least very much adjacent to one, and runoff is an issue, whether we could have an understanding, and I think you might be able to give it to us, about the spacing of the boards of the deck, which is a permeability issue, and the treatment of the ground underneath the deck, so that it is, because they won't be walking on it, so that it is ready and amenable to receiving the water that permeates through to be discharged in place as opposed to run off to the edges. Do you know what I'm talking about? Did I say anything sensible there?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Gillette, in looking at the photographs here, the area where the deck is going is actually off of the existing screen porch.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing in the photographs is really a grass area there, as opposed to a paver area that you described. And so I think that area would be perfectly, it would be accepting of water runoff immediately after the project is completed.
Ms. Gillette, this is Kevin Aaron Chair again. I think what you're seeing is the sample photograph of the device that puts the piles in, or no?
No.
Because in that sample photograph, right? Yeah. So that's the house itself.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Demay, thank you. Let's hope.
And there's the area. I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking, is there a way to treat the area underneath the deck such that it is more receptive to runoff than what would normally just be dirt under the deck? And what's the spacing of the boards such that the runoff does go down in the cracks as opposed to just off to the edges?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Commissioner Gillette. So I pulled up the image. Hopefully everyone can see this image here. This is the area, terrible rectangle outline where the deck would go, as Mr. Public indicated, at the same elevation, to note, off of the back existing sunroom there. So the deck would, by nature, since it's not covered, have permeability. It's designed to have water pass through it so it doesn't collect and then need its own drainage system. So their water will go through the deck and drip down. Your specific question, is there another treatment other than allowing underneath the deck to revert to just, I guess, soil? I don't know. It's not included in the application materials what they would do based on the way that it was described. I thought they were going to leave it in its current state. There appears to be enough room to actually get some type of lawn equipment under there and mow it, but it's not indicated unless Mr. Public is aware in their application materials themselves.
Well, no, and I'm assuming it's like any other deck, is within a short period of time, any grass that's there will die because it's not getting any sun. I've never asked this about anything else. I'm glad to know that the brick area appears it's not under your red box, or what appears to be possibly brick. I'm just wondering if it, particularly if that's something we ought to think about in terms of whatever's under the deck is going to die. And if it's just hard packed clay, I don't know if that's a concern or not. If it's Trex, are the boards smack up against each other, or is there that slight gap that you would have with wood to accommodate expansion? It changes what the surface of the deck is. I'm just curious about, particularly moving forward with other applications, whether this is worth thinking about or not. As I say, my reaction off the top of my head is this is not significant. But I'm just trying to learn a little something about whether that's anything we ever talk about.
Mr. May, or sorry, Mr. Pudlick, can you speak to that just in terms of whether that's something that would be germane to our termination?
I don't believe so. I think in this case, the applicant has gone to some length to minimize any disturbance to the ground underneath the deck, and so that was kind of the intent in using the helical piles there. And so when they came into me, they said, "Hey, this is our intent here. We're not going to do anything other than screwing these piles in the ground." And I said, "That's great. That's really going to minimize any kind of potential impact on the wetland area." And we didn't, frankly, talk about any treatment beyond that because my thinking was, hey, they're not going to touch anything else here. And so in my mind, that seemed like a best case scenario.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Do we have any other questions? Mr. Kaplan, I don't know if this is from the last item, but you're...
I had a comment or clarification.
Oh, good. Your hand. Okay, good. Mr. Kaplan.
Might help, Mr. Commissioner, through you to Commissioner Gillette. The applicant's narrative indicates that they're going to use Trex no-show fasteners. And being familiar with that product myself, those do provide gaps between the boards, because the fasteners themselves actually lock together between the boards. So there is a gap. So there would be water running down between the boards on the deck. I also don't think even when the grass dies, that's not going to change the condition of the superficial soils that are going to be under the deck anyway. So I appreciate, if there's not lawn there, that changes things maybe slightly, but whether or not the soils are, absorbing water, I think is not going to be affected, largely by that. So I guess my point is I don't see this as being, a significant change.
Well, good. I know that, and that's very helpful to know. That does help a lot. And I guess maybe it's just a little bit in my quest of it may not be a significant change, but if you're making a change, let's make it a positive change as opposed to negative. No, I feel very much assured by your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. I appreciate that clarification and you noticing that. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Dumais on this item? Okay, seeing none, then I would entertain a motion on this item, either to determine it as potentially significant or not significant. Ms. Gillette.
I would like to make a motion to determine this application as non-significant.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Any comment? None from Ms. Gillette. From Mr. Prestidge.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Gillette, request for a friendly amendment that we add one condition, and that be that the limits of work not extend beyond the mown lawn in the backyard.
Fully agreed.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to amend my motion to include Mr. Prestige's suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Prestidge. This is Kevin Hern, Chair again. Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Do we have any other discussion on this item? So before we vote, just to clarify, a yay vote is to determine it not significant. So let me try my minds. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Thank you, Mr. Prestidge. Item passes 4-0. We are now moving on to the hearing portion of the agenda. So first up is item number 6, Mr. Dumais. Should I start with my part of it, or do you start?
Mr. Chairman, I can read the legal notice, and then after I do that, you can do your piece if that's okay with you.
Please proceed.
West Hartford Plan and Zoning Commission legal notice. The Town of West Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission, also acting as the Inland, Wetland, and Watercourse Agency, will hold its regular meeting at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. The public hearing and meeting will be conducted exclusively in a format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act 2120, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings virtually. Proceedings will convene at 6:15 or there soon after, as the matter may be heard on the following. 2668 Albany Avenue, application subdivision 299, requesting approval of a 4-lot residential subdivision of approximately 2.02 acres of land located in an R13 single-family zone. Submitted for TPC receipt on October 7th, public hearing scheduled for November 3rd. At this hearing, interested persons may be heard or written communication submitted. The application is available for public review in the Town Planning and Zoning Office from 214 Town Hall, 50 South Main Street, West Hartford, Connecticut, or by visiting the town's website by clicking the Government tab, Boards and Commissions, Town Planning and Zoning, Inland, Wetland, Watercourse Agency, Next Meeting Agenda, or by an email request to comment.tpz@westhartfordct.gov. Members of the public can view this meeting live on YouTube at https://mphiarfvhts or on West Hartford Community Television at www.whctv.org, YouTube Channel 5. The meeting is also recorded for on-demand viewing and will be available on the town's website for at least 45 days. Any interested person may participate in real time by calling the following number: 1-408-418-9388 and using the following access code: 2339-279-5536 at 6:15 p.m. Participants using caller ID blocking will not be permitted to participate. Participants will be called in the order in which their call was received. When prompted by the chair and/or moderator, participants will have the permission to speak on matters germane to the hearing. Lastly, written comment may be received. Any interested person may submit written comment via email to comment.tpz@westhartfordct.gov or via mail to Town Planning and Zoning Commission, Town Plan Zoning Office, from 214 Town Hall, 50 South Main Street, West Hartford, Connecticut. Written comments will be made part of the record at the November 3rd hearing and will be posted on the town's website. In order to be included as part of the record, comments must meet the following requirements. They must be received no later than 3 p.m. on November 3rd, 2021. The subject of the emails shall state the application number and address and the hearing date. The body of the email must begin with the person's interested full name and street address, and the comments must be germane to the application and not longer than 500 words. Kevin Ahern, TPC IWW Chair, Todd Dumais, Town Planner. Posted to the town website on 10/19 and published in the Hartford Current on 10/21 and 10/28.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. I will very quickly go through my script, which I only have to read once, thank goodness. So good evening again. I'm Kevin Ahern, Chair of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's public hearings of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, also acting as the Inland, Wetlands, and Watercourse Agency. For the record, I'd like to note that the required meeting agenda, application materials, and legal notices are all available on the town's website. This meeting is being conducted in a virtual format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act number 21-2, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings virtually. I'd now like to outline all attendees' rules of engagement and how the commission operates the public meeting. Those presenting or commenting should state their name and address for the record. Please spell your name. Commissioners may ask questions during the testimony of the applicant. All questions and comments will be directed through the chair and only after recognition by the chair, including follow-ups. If feasible, the chair will have the members hold their questions until the end of the applicant's presentation or the end of a logical break in the applicant's presentation. Following the testimony of the applicant, the public will have a chance to comment about the current application in the following order. First, those wishing to speak in favor of the application, then those wishing to speak in opposition to the application, and then finally those wishing to speak but neither in favor nor in opposition to the application. Upon conclusion of the public's comments, the applicant will have an opportunity to address the opinions expressed. Upon conclusion of the applicant's rebuttal, and if there are no further questions from the commissioners, the public hearing will be closed. It is the practice of the commission to render a decision on an application on the same night, following all items on the public meeting agenda. With that, will the applicant please proceed?
Mr. Chairman, before we go to the applicant, I just want to note for the commission that we had a late items email that went out to the commission about 2 hours ago. In that email, there were updated plans associated with this subdivision application. Those plans and any changes on those plans were purely responsive to prior staff comments that you all received. In addition, there were 2 late memos from staff, one from my office stating that all prior planning division comments have been satisfactorily addressed, and then another memo from the Director of Community Development noting that all of the required elements for site drainage related to subdivision have been addressed per the subdivision standards. So I just wanted to point out for the record that those items and communication went out to the commission and are now part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Dumaine. Is the applicant ready to proceed? I think you need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I thought I had. My name is Steve Trinkus. I'm a licensed professional engineer with an office at 114 Hunters Ridge Road in Southbury, Connecticut, representing the applicant. If I could get permission, I'd like to share my screen so I can walk through the plans.
Please proceed.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Okay, the subject property is located 2668 Albany Avenue. Huntington Drive is approximately 125 feet to the west or to the left-hand side of the property. The intersection with Mountain Road is about 1,400 feet west of the property. It's on a long straight section of Albany Turnpike that pitches downhill from the east down towards Mountain Road. Remarkably, the only drainage from Connecticut DOT, there is a box culvert under Albany Avenue, and there's a couple catch basins further west that tie into this drain. Along our entire frontage, there is no DOT drainage at all. There are 2 structures currently on the site. Go to my next sheet. There is a single family house here that will be kept as the residence on lot number 2. There is another barn-like structure that is also a residence that is on the proposed lot 3. That structure will be removed and a new home is sited in that area. The crosshatch area is the existing impervious cover driveways and the barn structure, which will be removed. There's a large area straddling proposed lots 3 and 4, just kind of a big paved parking area. There are 2 curb cuts existing onto Albany Avenue. One is here. The other one is west. They'll serve lot 4. So we're maintaining these 2 curb cuts as the primary driveways to lots 3 and 4. Lot 2, we're going to move the entrance over to the east and come in and then join the existing driveway that comes up, but we'll again reduce the impervious cover because we don't need all of the pavement up on the western end of the lot. Lot 1 will have a driveway coming in from Albany Avenue. There are a series of white pine trees located along the frontage of the site. We're actually only going to remove 3 of them. There was one on lot 4, one on lot 2 and one on lot 1. The other white pines here will remain along the roadway, and we would request, with the number of trees that are remaining, that we are not obligated to plant additional street trees because we have quite a few here already. There is existing sanitary sewer, water, and gas in the road. Those utilities currently serve the 2 buildings. They will be relocated as necessary, and new connections will be made for the other building lots, primarily lots 1 and 4. This plan, which is sheet 3 of the plan set by my office, shows for lot 1, new underground electric coming in from this pole, new sewer and water lines coming in. And the gas connection, we have an existing gas line that comes in just in front of the proposed lot 3, which serves the 2 existing buildings. And we're going to tee off that line and come in the grass shoulder to lots 1, a relocated line to lot number 2, and also to lot 4. So that will minimize, potential excavation under Connecticut DOT, for these utility connections. I have spoken with Monique Burns from the Connecticut DOT office in Berlin, and she has seen the plans, and we would apply for the encroachment permits for the new driveways and the utility connections after, assuming we receive approval from your agency tonight. The lot itself is relatively flat. Most of it is lawn area. There's a little bit of slope in the back, but it kind of drains towards the west and then comes back out. But the majority of the southern half of the property is virtually dead level lawn. The homes will have basements in them. We will have an internal sump pump system that will pump up footing drain water to a small Cultec system on each lot, which will have a little overflow slotted cap at the top of these at grade. The soils on the site, which is very common for the West Hartford area, there are a lot of silty loam soils. It gets rather restrictive at about 24 to 30 inches below grade. It gets more clayey and very compact. So these systems are designed to be very shallow. These are only 12-inch high systems. And they're, again, just allowed to slow the water down. It'll bubble out the top and then simply dissipate within the lawn area. The upper soil layers are permeable. We had done a couple perk tests in the beginning, and they were inch and 13. So 1 inch drop in 13 minutes, basically 3 inches per hour in these upper soil layers. So they are permeable. So smaller storm events and smaller amounts of water will simply infiltrate. For the roof drains of the 3 new lots, 1, 3, and 4, there'll be a stone-filled trench in the rear yards, again, for that roof runoff to drain to, which will allow it to infiltrate into those upper soil layers. Overall on the site, there's only a slight increase of about 1,200 square feet of impervious cover because we're removing so much of the impervious cover that already exists. And the drainage paths actually for post-development change, where the peak rate of runoff that would reach Albany Avenue will be less after development than currently goes there. Based on numerous field inspections of the site, including once during a rainfall event, except for some of the water from the driveway, which is paved, draining out onto the road, there was no evidence of runoff from any of the lawn areas from draining out towards Albany Avenue at all. We received 2 sets of comments, as your planner mentioned, from engineering. The second one from Julie was November 1st, and I was able to address those comments yesterday and send Todd the updated plans, the stormwater report, and a response. And as he noted earlier, engineering is happy with those changes. We had also previously addressed Todd's comments both on my map and on the record survey map by Dutton Associates, and addressed all of them. We have an erosion sedimentation control plan. We have a watershed mapping plan, which your engineering department requested. Basically, we're using Filtrex socks, or actually, excuse me, silt fence on the site. Grading is very minimal. The Most grading is where the existing building was and in the back. But other than that, the grading is basically within a foot of existing grade. So very minor earthwork being proposed. We have stockpiles for each lot, construction entrances on all 4 of the driveways, which are required by the 2002 erosion guidelines by Connecticut DEP. We have a construction narrative with details for the erosion control measures, the stormwater management systems, and all of the MDC requirements for utility connections going forward. Lastly, in Todd's request, we provided a 40 scale plan of the subdivision. The other plans were a 20 scale because of the relatively small area of the subdivision being 2 acres. The zone only requires 13,000 square feet. Most of these lots have at least, well, the smallest one is lot number 4 at 19,000. Lot 3 is 20,000. Lot 2 is 27, and lot 1 is 21,000. They all have the minimum 85-foot frontage along Albany Avenue, and that's pretty much my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any commission questions or from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me just start quickly just by asking Todd, and I always have to be because we don't get subdivisions very often. And just I think to scope the questions, because I know there were some discussion of things that could fall into our other responsibilities, for instance, as the Inland Wetlands Commission, which aren't before us, I believe. But Mr. May, could you clarify that for me?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So you are correct. We rarely get subdivisions any longer in West Hartford because most of the easily developable land has already been developed. So in instances where you do, oftentimes those are associated with a corresponding wetland application. In this instance, there are no wetlands, so you're just acting on a pure subdivision. What that means in your decision-making criteria is somewhat different than your role in either a wetland as a wetland agency or your role as a special use permit approval agency when you were acting as the zoning authority. In those other roles, you have a set of regulations or zoning regulations or wetland regulations, and then you also have some discretionary authority when you're reviewing an application. Most notably, a special use permit where you're afforded very specific criteria, which is discretionary by nature. However, when you're looking at a subdivision regulation and your authority to approve them as the planning authority, you're looking at a non-discretionary authority role in that you're almost acting as a quasi-administrative agency in that you have to apply the standards of our subdivision regulations, which is Chapter A184A, for conformance with all the requirements there and any associated zoning requirements. So it's a more limited review in that you're really reviewing essentially in a case like this where there's no public infrastructure being created, whether or not there are public utilities to serve the lots, that each of the lots meets a dimensional criteria of the underlying zone, and that there are no other grading or drainage impacts. That's kind of your authority to apply the subdivision standards to the lot. One thing to note, and it was in the staff comments and their responses, there is a specific request for a waiver of one of our required standards under our subdivision regulations, and that waiver relates to the requirement in subdivisions to build public sidewalks. And if there is a reason to not do so, an applicant can request a waiver for construction of public sidewalks. In this instance, there are no public sidewalks on the north side of Albany Avenue at all, from Bishop's Corner all the way west to Avon. So that's the reason stated there. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dumais. I always need a little bit of a primer before we dive into this. So I appreciate it. Do we have any questions from the commissioners? Mr. Pressage and then Ms. Gillette.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Dumais, please. Mr. Dumais, I'm looking at the updated final staff comments as they're identified on the agenda dated today. And I'd like if you could please concisely summarize have all the documentation, all the documents, all the information needed and provided? And does the applicant demonstrate compliance with A84-1A?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Commissioner Prestige. Yes, so the last staff comment in particular, I'd like to point you to the comment and memo from the Acting Community Development Director, Mr. Martin, who indicated that the subdivision meets all of the standards of A 184-14. That's the approvals required standard that you just referred to. So those are the standards within the subdivision regulations that affect to engineering and construction requirements of street improvements and any drainage systems, along with design for water and sewer service. So he has confirmed that. He does mention, and it's worth noting, that the individual developments of the lots to receive new construction would be subject at a future time, if this subdivision will be approved, to zoning permit review. So one of the things to point out is when someone's proposing a subdivision that's not linked to any other type of regulatory authority, most notably our wetland regulations, they only have to show a hypothetical house on a lot and hypothetical grading. So someone could come in post subdivision and change any of the layouts on the screen that Mr. Trinkus is showing in this instance in terms of different house placement or grading. But in such an instance, it would still be reviewed with the same standards in our zoning for drainage impacts, grading impacts, and anything else. At the end of the day, it still has to conform with the zoning. Your role in this process is really to look at this from a larger, big picture view. Do the requirements of the subdivision standards, are they met with the creation of, in this instance, will be 3 new lots rather than the one that exists today?
Thank you, Mr. DeMay. Appreciate the clarification on both the citation and then also confirming that the answer is yes. The explanation. I'm satisfied.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair, and we have Ms. Gillette.
As you might imagine, my question is about the trees. Number one, has this property been evaluated by the historic district at all? It's one of the few remaining larger parcels along one of our main thoroughfares. Does it have any historic value or designation?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. DeMay, can you answer that?
Commissioner Gillette, is that a question for staff or the applicant, Commissioner Gillette?
Either.
I'll take a stab at it first, if you don't mind, and then I'll be happy to turn it over to the applicant. So I am not aware of any formal review that the applicant may or may not have done with the Historic District Commission. It's not my understanding that the property is listed as an individually listed historic property in the community, but your observation that it is an older property is absolutely correct. So if we go and we look at the field cards associated with the parcel, the buildings themselves were both built, at least according to the field cards, in the 1850s. So the barn would be obviously proposed to be demolished, but not the existing home. So what normally would occur in an instance like this, so if we look at Mr. Trinkus's map of the proposed activity on the site here, you could zoom in. Thank you, Mr. Trinkus. If you could zoom into one of the earlier versions that shows the existing barn.
Yeah.
There we go. So in this instance where you have little bit hard to see there, but that outline that is being traced right there, that's the barn. And obviously that house is not going to be built as part of the barn, but it would be built as part of the demolished barn. The historic house itself would remain. But since the barn exceeds 500 square feet and obviously it's older than 50 years, it would be subject to Historic District Commission review and approval insofar as the demolition permit were being requested to be done in less than 90 days. So there's a posting requirement for any historic building that, notification of abutting property owners and a notice that a potentially historic structure is proposed to be demolished, and then they have a chance to review that and opine upon it. However, that same ordinance, and this is not a zoning ordinance, it falls under the building code, our local building ordinances. You do not have to wait 90 days if you go through a qualified land use approval process, meaning that if you go through a process that includes neighborhood notification, public hearing in the newspaper, that 90-day wait period, it does not exist as a requirement. So a subdivision, since we notified direct abutting property owners and published in Hartford Current, would mean that if this subdivision were to be approved, the applicant could come in after a map was filed, and on this parcel in particular, they could come in and file demolition permits, and they wouldn't have to wait that 90-day period.
I wish I understood that more fully. That's a little concerning to me. And again, to get back to my trees, the white pines along the front appear to be a remnant of a historic tree line. And it may only be a tree line in conjunction with this particular property, which was one piece. And only 3 are designated to come down on the tree line, although there are 4 in other portions of the property, and they're white pines. White pines are very, very soft trees, and I have very real concerns about the construction in the area damaging the trees so that they aren't taken down now, but we can hope that they die later. And what, if any, plans of replacing those trees? He had said that that there were lots of them, so he didn't feel any compunction to add more. And yet half of lot 2 and a goodly portion of lot 3, there are no existing white pines to continue the tree line, and you can see the sort of missing teeth. I just wonder, you're building all of these houses. I know it's not a building permit, so it's not a question of what's your landscaping. I just wonder if the applicant has any comment on that. And I also have a question about what's the pool what's in the back? There's like a pool. What's the pond or whatever that is in the back that is marked as existing and appears to be blue in the rear of lot 3?
Mr. Dickus, you need to turn your microphone on. So you're muted after a period of time.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. There is a pool that straddles the proposed property line between lot 2 and 3. That's going to be removed. So this shape back here, kidney shape, is the pool, an existing pool that's going to be removed from the site. Regarding the trees, to address Commissioner Gillette's comment, I actually have a Bachelor of Science in Forestry, which is a little unusual for most civil engineers. I'm very cognizant of the impacts of construction relative to trees. On lot number 1, there are 6 trees along the frontage, all white pines. They vary between 12 and looks like 10 to 15 inches. There is only one close to the driveway we're going to remove. I actually, when I was out in the field a week ago, I looked at where the driveways was relative to the 15-inch pine on the east side of the driveway to lot 1. And the driveway here, there's virtually going to be a 6-inch cut to place gravel, and that's all the work we're going to do. We're not going to impact the root system of this tree where it was going to cause it to die in 5 years from now. On lot number 2, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pine trees along the frontage. 3 of them are within the lot. 3 of them are just outside the lot in the DOT right-of-way. Again, 1 of the 3 in the DOT right-of-way, which is right adjacent to the driveway, will be taken down, but one's slightly farther out from the driveway will not be. One of the reasons the driveway was cited here was, it's the shortest distance to get to the house site. I could have come in over here, but I would have increased the impervious cover. And as I do a lot of work with low impact development, we want to minimize impervious cover. So this was a good location for the driveway. And again, only 1 tree came down. On lot number 3, there are 3 trees kind of in the western half of the lot. There's a couple more back just before you get to the parking area. And again, this driveway we're maintaining as access, so there's no new construction for this driveway. So these 5 trees on lot number 3 will remain. On lot number 4, again, there's 5 trees along the frontage, varying between 12 and 24 inches. One of the 24-inch trees we've shown as potentially being taken down because it's very close. I have to widen the driveway out a little bit here. And if we can save it, we're happy to, but I'd rather show it as potentially being removed in the event that the root systems are impacted by the widening. I don't believe they will be, but I'd rather show it to be removed, and if we can save it, we'll save it. There's a cluster of 3 pines in the center of this area. And again, in looking at where the garage was and the driveway, unfortunately, this cluster kind of, would have to come down, but there is another grouping of 6 trees between that straddle the line between 3 and 4 that will remain in place. There are a couple other non-evergreen trees. There's, maple and a willow on lot number 2. There's an elm, walnut, a huckleberry, a large maple on lot 1. What's shown as a cedar in the back actually is a tamarack tree, which is the only type of evergreen that actually drops its needles like a deciduous tree. And again, that tree will be remaining. 1 10-inch ginkgo here, again, off the house corner is being taken down. But as Todd pointed out, if the future house moves forward, then this tree would, again, could remain. These are conceptual house plans from my client of what he'd like to build here. But again, if the house, say, moved forward, then that tree could remain. But I'd rather be conservative and show you trees to be removed now. And if we can save more of them, obviously, we'd be happy to.
Thank you. And I do like to hear that you're a forestry person. That does make me feel better.
It's rare, but thank you very much.
I guess for instance, on lot number 4, if you were to simply flip the house, you could avoid the 3 trees in some ways.
And that would, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But that's for the next phase. That's not for the subdivision phase. Maybe I'm doing just a little bit of heads up, but I would like to ask about, and again, understanding this is all conceptual, the turnaround areas in, and I think all 4 of the houses for the proposed pavement cross into the 10-foot side yard. Is that an issue, Todd? It's not with a subdivision because you could move that, but is that an issue?
Commissioner Gillette, to answer your question, no, it's not. So the hammerhead,
Okay.
or that turnaround, whatever we want to call it there,
Yeah.
that's allowed to go up to 2 feet off of the property line.
Okay,
Since
so
they
that's
well
all right.
exceed
That's
that
just
dimensional. And I would just want to circle back to the trees. There's 2 different areas in the subdivision regulations that deal with trees. The first part is in 18420K, I believe, where it basically just asks an applicant to identify any specimen trees, and specimen trees are only defined in our subdivision ordinances as trees that exceed 30-inch in caliper at the ground line, which is a different way to measure tree calipers. There's not a standard methodology, but that one's a bit unique.
Yeah.
And then there's another section in 184.26. And I just want to read this because it's pertinent to your line of questioning that you just went through. It says, so this is your authority as a subdivision approval entity. Trees may be required to be furnished by the applicant in tracts which would otherwise be excessively barren. Trees such as sugar maple, red oak, or London plane are suggested. Here's where it's interesting. Conifers shall not be used to meet this requirement. So it specifically mentions that, you know, and this is talking about street trees, right? That you can require an applicant to place them every 50 feet on center. So I think the tree spacing that we just went through, that Mr. Trinkus just discussed there, is obviously much closer than that in terms of repetition on center. But for street trees, it's not a good street tree. And I think you're right, Commissioner Gillette, that's a historic vestige of some kind of tree that lined the property. Although they vary, if you look at the size of the tree, I suspect that they're much younger than the house itself. They're not particularly old, but they were planted by someone, I guess, you know, somewhere 75 years or 50 years ago.
Well, and I would think, you know, somewhat as a hedge that got big, and certainly a white pine is not standing alone, if you will, in a row, is not the most stable of trees. I'm and we don't have a historic tree line element. That just concerns me. That's all. And I'm very pleased that the stormwater runoff is actually going to be a little bit, but every little bit counts, a little bit less than what it is currently, if that's my understanding. And I think that's good. And I guess I figure if there are more trees there at the front, you might be able to suck up even a little bit more. But that's, thank you for answering my questions. I am concerned about the historic element, but that would come in the building phase, correct?
Commissioner Gillette, yes. So the property is not identified as a historic property, and if any of our historic maps, although it's eligible based on age, and the piece that would be triggered would be on that lot 3 and 4, when you come in for the building phase and the associated demolition of the barn or shed, whatever that structure is.
I'm always open to changing my mind, and I won't make any predictions, but I guess maybe the discussion of this might be a little bit of a heads up for what I'd be concerned with later. And thank you very much, and I appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Any other questions for the applicant? Just checking to see. I don't see any hands up from Mr. Kaplan. All right. If we have no further questions from the commission, then we would go to, before we go to the public portion of it, if the applicant has anything further before we go there, it won't be your last opportunity to speak.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else to add, but if there's any questions from the public, we'll be happy to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Trinkas. Mr. Dumais, do we have any comments from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did receive several inquiries from the public on this application, which resulted in staff transmitting the contents of the said application back to those folks, but we never received any actual comments back to be made part of any record. That goes for both written and phone calls, and I'm just looking at our participant list, and I'll allow Mr. Goslin to correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not see any call-in users that might be looking to speak towards this application.
Mr. Chairman, I also do not believe I see any call-in users.
Thank you, Mr. Goslin. Thank you, Mr. Dumais. Then we would move back to the applicant, and I'd give the applicant one opportunity, more opportunity to speak before we close the hearing.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to actually thank both your engineering and planning staff, for guidance during this application process. While I've done land use for 40 years, this is the first project I've done in West Hartford. They were very helpful. Their comments were clear. Todd and I did speak at one point where I misinterpreted one of his comments, but the process went very smooth, and I thank your staff for their help.
Thank you, Mr. Trickhouse. Yeah, I think we like to pride ourselves on being a little pickier than other towns, but I also like to think that we have the staff that we provide to make sure that people can get through that process. So thank you for the comments. I concur with the quality of the planning staff. All right, well then with that, we will close this hearing. So then next up would be item number 7, Mr. Dumais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 7, going back to our legal notice. West Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission legal notice. The Town of West Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission, also acting as the Inland Wetland and Watercourse Agency, will hold a regular meeting at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. The public hearing and meeting will be conducted exclusively in a format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act number 2120, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings in a virtual format. The proceedings will convene at 6:15 p.m. or soon thereafter, as the matter may be heard on the following: 4 Banbury Lane, application Inland Wetland 1121, requesting approval of an inland wetland and watercourse permit to conduct certain regulated activities which may have an adverse impact on a wetland regulated area. The applicant has submitted a plan to perform site work and associated landscaping. The proposed work is partially within a 150-foot upland review area. No direct wetland impacts are proposed. Submitted for agency receipt on October 7th, determined to be potentially significant and scheduled for public hearing on November 3rd. This was published on the town's website on 10/29 and published in the Hartford Current on 10/21 and 10/28. For the record, I'd like to remind the commission that there was a request received under communication item number 2B that this application be opened and immediately continue to our December meeting by the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. So we are now in the public hearing for this item. It has been opened. We have a request to continue this hearing to our December 6th, is it, Mr. Dumais? December 6th meeting. Do we have a motion to that effect?
I'd like to make a motion to continue the hearing to our next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. The motion is on the table. So with that, do we have any other comments on this motion to continue? Okay, seeing none, let me try your minds. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, those opposed? All right, the item is continued to our December 6th meeting. Item number 8, Mr. Dumais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 8, the West Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission legal notice. The Town of West Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission, also acting as the Inland Wetland and Watercourse Agency, will hold its regular meeting at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. The public hearing and meeting will be conducted exclusively in a format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act number 2120, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings in a virtual format. The proceedings will convene at 6:15 p.m. or soon thereafter, as the matter may be heard on the following: 116 Westmont, application Inland Wetland 1158, requesting approval of a map amendment to the official Inland Wetland and Watercourse map of the Town of West Hartford. The proposed amendment is based on an on-site soil survey prepared by a professional soil scientist, submitted for agency receipt on October 7th. Required public hearing be scheduled for November 3rd, published on the town's website on 10/19 and in the Hartford Current on 10/21 and 10/28.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair. Is the applicant ready to proceed on this item?
Yes, good evening. My name is Megan Raymond. I'm a professional wetland scientist and registered soil scientist, and I conducted the site work on 116 Westmont. And I apologize, I might have some technical issues. I've gotten kicked off of the WebEx a couple of times this evening. So please just put your hand up if you can't hear me or if I'm coming through illegibly, please. but I'll just begin on my presentation if you would so like me to. I was retained by the property owner, Mr. Michael Shaughnessy, to evaluate the potential boundary of inland wetlands on the property. This site visit occurred back in March of this year, and the reason for doing so was due to the actual town wetland map that is shown here on your screen. So if you look at the red parcel boundary that's outlined, we're at a single family residential neighborhood. It's a 1.36 acre lot located on the north side of Westmont Street. This parcel was sort of interesting to look at from a mapping perspective, because you can see on your town map that you have three different symbologies here. You have green, which is, here we go, perfect. Thanks a lot, Brett. You have green, that's wetland, and then you have an orange color, that's your developed wetland, and then yellow is deleted wetland, parcels that have gone through a formal deletion process through this exact format. So when you look at this, look at the construct of the site, the developed wetland with the existing wetland to the areas that were deleted on the adjacent parcel, you sort of see that something is not really matching up here very cleanly. When I visited the property, I did verify that there are no poorly drained soils or inland wetland soils located on the property. The property exists within an area that's a till area, sort of the top of a drumlin. So we have a mapped Weathersfield unit, and we have these Wilbraham Menlo soils that exist to the west, offsite to the west, but they are not present on the subject property. And as a result, we prepared a soil report verifying or documenting these findings and the condition of the soils, as well as the formal application for which we're here to discuss this evening. In all, what we're looking at with this map amendment is a deletion of approximately 0.36 acres of mapped inland wetland soils on the site. The deletion of these resources essentially tie into the site work for the deletion on the subject on the adjacent property to the west, which is 120 Westmont. Interestingly, we still have some areas that were not in the control of 116 Westmont that should be cleaned up at some point. And you can see, actually, do you mind going back down to that, Brett, please? You could on the SLR drawing, the aerial, or this is fine too. Either way, it actually maybe is that we still have this wetland system that exists within basically the road right of way, that's not present in the field. So the 116 Westmont is still encumbered with an upland review area by existing wetlands that are present on 120 Westmont, but as well as that wetland that kind of rings around the frontage of 120 that were not observed in the field. But irrespective, that is not the part of this application this evening. What we're looking at, I was just giving you a little background as to that. What we're looking to do here is with your approval is to just remove the wetland soils that were mapped on the site that are not reflective of the existing drainage conditions on the property. I'd be pleased to answer any questions about the methods or the findings, but thanks a lot for your time tonight. Really appreciate the forum.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair again. Do we have questions for the applicant? Mr. Prestage.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Raymond. Ms. Raymond, thank you for coming out. Appreciate the explanation. Could you go back to the air photo?
So will you scroll down there, Brett, please, to the aerial? Is that?
Yeah.
So just the second figure. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So yeah, no, we get it. We're dialed into the fact that this came from, soil conservation surveys way back from air photo interpretation, and everybody's got to clean up parcel by parcel. We're good with that. I understand your concern there. That said, appreciate the discussion of the till, the Weathersfield makes sense there. The northern boundary, there's a tree line there. There is a general slope from left to right. If I'm reading the elevation correctly, that all said, just want to double check. Any drainage to that? You mentioned there was no wetland soils. That said, was there any water bodies?
Yeah, inland wetland and water courses, no. So the site has no, I mean, there's certainly, there's
That
been
was
some,
good enough for me. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the answer is no.
Perfect. Just wanted to double check. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Prestidge. Do you have any other questions on this proposed map amendment?
Yes,
Is that Ms. Gillette?
yes.
Yes,
Um,
please proceed.
The property to the west, I believe you said it was 120 Westmont, which I do have to tell you, and this is just a point of personal privilege. It's Westmont. It is not Westmont Street. We had a previous application where street shows up all the time, and it's not a street. Anyway, part of my concern is we did an inland wetlands on 120. So the funny shape on the house next door indicates what soil scientists had determined was the actual wetlands, or did we say, okay, fine, build this house and destroy the wetlands in the yellow area? That's a fairly recent development. And how would it have impacted the soils next door?
Excuse me, Chairman, is that question directed to me?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question. Who's the
Okay.
best person to answer that? Would that be Mr. Dumay or Ms. Raymond?
Mr. Chairman,
Well-
I could take a shot at part of that
Okay.
question. So that wetland delineation for 120 Westmont was done by a wetland soil scientist in advance of development of that home, which was built in 1997. So that home was built and the wetland map amendment took place to adjust the wetland boundary to account for the fact that there weren't wetland soils present on the property.
Okay, so town deleted wetlands means that it had been designated by our archaic maps as wetlands. And when a soil scientist went out, he found that there were no actual wetlands in that brighter yellow area. Is that correct?
No, so the image on the screen here is a little bit, maybe your color rendering's off. I know mine's a bit off. So if we're looking at 120, Ms. Raymond kind of made this point of distinction. 120 was all green, so it was all mapped wetlands. Then subsequent to a soil scientist going out and field delineating the property, the boundaries were changed, and that's where we see it's yellow on 120. So that
Okay.
deleted soils. The other color, the orange, is developed wetland soils, and those are soils that essentially are mapped. The older inaccurate soil delineation from the Soil County Survey data that were mapped as such. However, it was noted by staff at the time when those were imposed with the enactment of our wetland regulations, those had already been developed in homes and properties. So they became developed wetlands when we enacted the wetland regulations back in the 70s.
Okay, okay, I begin to get that. Another question, well, and this isn't a question for the applicant per se, but the lot directly to the north of 120 is an infamous lot on Clark Drive that has been attempted to be developed numerous times. And do we have any recording of the change in the wetlands map for the Clark Drive? I think it is 13, 15. Ooh, let me get my little guy out here. 13. haven't wetland change tests been done on that parcel?
Commissioner Gillette, I don't know. Staff did not research that particular parcel. We did look at the parcel at 120 next door, just to look at, the question that you just asked, when that was delineated. That was prior to the development of that proposed home. But we stopped there since the
Okay.
the mapping that's before you this evening shares the common boundary and does not touch number 12. And if we look at the delineation report and the adopted wetland mapping for 120, I would say it's 60% of the way along the shared frontage of 12. So there was no overlap between remaining wetland soils where the cursor hand was right there. But we could certainly look into that, but we did not do that for this application.
I guess I'm just continually surprised, but you make a change for a piece of property, which is thoroughly legitimate. Totally the right. I mean, the numbers, the soils are there, and you make that change, and then 20 years later, you find out that the wetland soils next door. Oh no, they're not wetland soils anymore. These things do have a way of spreading, and I guess that was kind of my question there. And I am familiar with this piece of property, and it's I'm not quibbling with the findings that were found. It's just a soggy backyard. It's not wetlands. But I just wondered how it impacted the soils around it as we see our, I will say, archaic maps updated. You get kind of funny hodgepodges that seem to lead to impacts next door, such as 120. It may not be cause and effect, but 120 develops and now we're deleting again. That was my question. If anybody has any comments.
I mean, can I just, do you mind for the Megan Raymond just saying one addendum to that is that, I mean, the characteristics of 116 are not tied to any of the development of 120. I think you could look at it the other way and look at this as a refinement and a correction of the actual wetland mapping that started with the 120 mapping. And then this is just a continuation of that. The corridor exists on 120, but it's in the western portion of that site. So it's not like that didn't result in a deletion here or an amendment. It's just the fact that it picked up
It's
on
not cause and effect in that direction. It's cause and effect in the other direction, to the extent that it is now being recognized that also next door, it is not the same sort of wetlands as 120. Not that it caused it. I'm saying the map is catching up, as opposed to the catching up is driving the map. I'm saying this totally wrong.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. No, I think that's accurate. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Hammond.
Okay.
Any follow-up question? All right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, then unless the applicant has anything further, this won't be your last opportunity, but we would now move on to the public comment portion.
I have
Mr.
nothing further at
DeMay,
this time.
okay, thank you, Mr. DeMay or Mr. Goslin. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this map amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe we have any new call-ins at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Goslin. Mr. DeMay.
I do not see any members of the public. We did have one member of the public contact our office, but there have been no formal comments submitted, just questions on the application. I shut off my camera and I went to our files, and Commissioner Gillette, being our resident historian, has an excellent memory. There were two, if we want to go back up a little bit, there was in 1988, go up, lot number 26 on Clark Drive. You can see there's a triangle of wetlands. So as the development for that property there was a field delineation on that property. And then she is right, 12, she said, I refer to it as the infamous lot. I had not time to look through this rather enormous file, but there is a significant wetland file associated with both an amendment, but also a regulated activity, which were denied by prior wetlands commissions. So nothing was ever changed in terms of applications. In fact, applications one of them was withdrawn in 1999. And then there was another application in 2000, which failed to go forward for the development, which included filling of wetlands on lot 12, and that was denied.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. All right, do
Thank you.
we have any other questions on this item before we move on? Wait, where are we? We are now past the public comments portion on this item. Does the applicant have anything further before we close this hearing?
Megan Raymond, no, we do not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. All right, with that then, this hearing is closed. So at this point, what we would do is we would move back, as we are done with the hearings for today, we'll move back to a consideration of the items. So we'd start with item number 6, 2668 Albany Avenue. This is the proposed subdivision. So for purposes of discussion, I'd like to entertain a motion from the commission. Mr. Prestige.
Hope I get this motion correct. If I get it wrong, just please correct me. But I'd like to move that we approve the application for the subdivision of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. Mr. Dumais, do you have a comment on that motion?
So I'd like to ask Mr. Prestige, we do not do subdivisions frequently, but we do have a standard set of subdivision conditions that would apply. I can read them for the commission's consideration, but these are the standard set, barring any other additional comments. First, plans of record would be incorporated by reference into this application approval. Subdivision approval is subject to full compliance with the town erosion and sediment control requirements in accordance with the 2002 guidelines, state of Connecticut. Bi-weekly inspection reports of S&E controls shall be submitted once development of any sites occur. Prior to the start of any site disturbance, all sediment and erosion controls and tree protection shall be installed once installed, but before the commencement of any site disturbance, the town planner shall be notified and provided the opportunity to inspect. Development proposals for each individual lot shall be subject to review and approval of the Town of West Hartford Engineering Division. Mere stones shall be set at all 4 corners of the subdivisions. The applicant shall submit to the town planner for review and approval final as-built plans certifying that the mere stones have been set and that all other improvements are completed in accordance with the plans. And then lastly, final plans for the subdivision shall be filed and recorded in the town clerk's office within 90 days of date of any of approval. Failure to file the final plans in the prescribed time shall result in a null and void of the approval, except that the commission may extend the time for such filing up to 2 additional 90-day periods, and the plans shall remain valid until the expiration of such extended time.
Mr. Chairman, I amend my motion to include those conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. So we have the motion
Thank
as
you, Mr.
amended
Or
by Mr. Prestige. Mr. Prestige, any comments on the motion as amended?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think it's a straight, more forward administrative procedure. Thank you, Mr. Hearn and Mr. Tudlick for laying out the background on the application and our role in its review and consideration for approval. I'd also note a couple of things. We need housing. We need housing in different ways. If it fits here, and apparently it does based on our zoning, then so be it. they clearly met the request, the conditions, but there was a series of questions that went from the town to the applicant. And eventually they got around to satisfying all that. That's very important. And then, the last comment I would make, yes, while we do need housing and does fit into this area here for this subdivision, we do consider just in a general, to say generally, trees and certain aesthetics and the benefits of vegetation and trees to the community. It adds so many different things from the experience people have, the way it calms traffic, it calms a community, so on and so forth, and the role that they have on a state road right here where people are driving to work with the town to maintain some semblance of vegetation in that area. When that comes out, I look forward to hearing about how they will cooperate with that. When it comes to things like that, whether it's a little piece of wetland here, some trees there, it's a cumulative effect, guys. It's not, we could look at any one parcel and say, no big deal. But at the end of the year and at the end of 5 years and 10 years, it adds up. So certainly want to echo the concerns of Ms. Gillette. But again, that's for another phase in development of this site. So that said, those are my thoughts, Mr. Ahern.
Thank you, Mr. Prestage. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair again. Do we have any other comments on the subdivision?
Hey,
Mr. Kaplan?
one other comment, Mr. Chairman. Listening to Mr. Prestige speak, I mean, I'll echo that it seems like this is a pretty straightforward procedural move for our commission, but he also pointed out, that we need housing. But part of the POCD, from my understanding, was that we're also in pursuit of a more diverse housing arrangement in town. And I'm curious, what I guess I should ask this question earlier, but I didn't think of it. Maybe this is a question, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. DeMay. Do we have any idea what the residence in the structure that's being demolished consists of? Is that like an accessory dwelling unit or an apartment, or is that a single family home?
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Mr. DeMay?
Mr. Kaplan, I don't recall. At one point, I think there was approval, and I'll look to Mr. Pudlick, for a home-based occupation for use in that structure. I don't know how it's currently being used, though.
It's the psychiatrist's office. I'm sorry, I interrupted. It was a doctor's office.
That would explain the extended parking lot.
Yeah. So I don't know its current use. I can just tell you, as Commissioner Gillette stated, that in past years it was approved for a home-based occupation.
And I don't think that has any bearing on our approval for the subdivision. But I was curious after Mr. Prestige's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair again. Do we have any further comment on this subdivision request?
Yes.
Ms. Gillette?
I appreciate, and it was stated much better than I do, the comments on trees and the impact, not only on ambience and perception and mental health. He did a very good job of making my case for trees, and I do really appreciate that. But like Mr. Kaplan, I guess, and it may have been a somewhat offhanded comment, but we have a need for housing. Yeah, I don't know we have a need for single family housing. I don't know if a demand for housing equals a need for housing. But it seems to me that that's a philosophical argument, and the argument before us is largely statutory. And although it may break my heart in some ways, it seems to me this application ticks every box on being eligible for a subdivision under our ordinances.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Thank you, Mr. Prestage. Do we have any further comment before we vote on this item? All right, seeing none, let me try your minds. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That's 4-0. The item is approved. We're skipping item number 7. That's been continued. So moving on to item number 8. This is the proposed map amendment on 116 Westmont. For purposes of discussion, I would like to entertain a motion. Mr. Prestige.
I would move that we accept the application, we approve the application for a map amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. Any comment on your motion?
Sure, thanks. I think, you know, a couple of things. I think it's fairly straightforward. I think we had a healthy discussion of the facts. Go back to it's interesting how often I lean on Ms. Gillette. You know, she brought in some discussion that caused the town planner to go research on adjacent lots. We had what I would think would be a fairly for a commission that meets once a month, you know, a fairly robust investigation of the site live and online, so to say. But behind all that, it began with what I thought was a thorough and accurate wetland delineation. I do just want to make one plug for Ms. Raymond. We get all sorts of wetland reports, and that was very concise, yet at the same time offered the technical, the details too, and it was a pleasure to read. And I don't think there's a lot more to be said other than we have a report that clarifies there are no regulated wetlands on the site. It's provided by a professional wetland scientist, soil scientist. Nothing to dispute that, and therefore I think it's a pretty straightforward approve the application. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair again. Any other comment on the motion? Right, hearing none, then let me try your minds. Oh, Mr. Kaplan, please.
Mr. Chairman, I guess through you to Mr. Dumais or Mr. Pudlick, I guess I just have one question about whether or not we seem to be running into these issues quite frequently with these historical wetlands maps, and then getting, you know, the wetland boundaries redrawn, and it turns out a lot of wetland soils aren't actually wetlands. Is there any way that we can, you know, I mean, just in this application alone, we're seeing some of the adjacent lots. It looks pretty clear that there are additional wetland soils, you know, mapped currently that are likely not wetland soils. And is there any way that we can sort of address some of that proactively in any capacity, just so that we're not continuously running into this going forward? Or is that sort of beyond what we have the capacity to do?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Commissioner Kaplan, I wouldn't say it's beyond the capacity of the wetland agency. However, it's it's in many instances beyond your scope and authority, insofar as wetland application is advanced most typically by a single property owner, and they hire their own delineated soil scientist to delineate the property without neighboring properties' consent to go on those properties and then provide the required survey mapping delineate those properties, we are limited to the property at hand. For us to then take that information, we'd have to go back to those properties, survey the properties, and kind of hire our own wetlands experts if the property owners weren't interested. So that's why we're always in this, kind of pattern of looking at these amendments as they come in on an individual basis. Absent the town hiring its own wetland and soil scientist and delineating the entire town, which would be quite expensive and costly. I don't know of another way to do it without getting just a bunch of property owners to work together for a specific property or neighborhood.
That happened once though, didn't it? On Oak Drive were there, somebody was doing a wetlands thing and talked to their neighbors and a couple of them joined in and they did it all together.
Yes, that was earlier this year. That was great.
It was good.
Yeah, that worked out. That one neighbor started early, and then they realized there was benefit to do it together. And that's the hope, I guess. But it usually would only be triggered if any of the adjacent property owners had interest in doing any kind of activity in the foreseeable future and saw the benefit. If the one other Oak Drive neighbor wasn't going to do a pool, I could imagine they wouldn't have participated in that delineation exercise.
Maybe we can encourage neighbors to talk to neighbors when they make some changes to see if anybody wants to go in on it.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais, for answering Mr. Kaplan's question. Mr. Kaplan, do you have any follow-up, or does anyone else have any questions? Hearing none, seeing none. Unless we have anything further, then we have the motion on this item. Let me try your minds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed. Item passes 4-0. Move on to town council referrals. I see none. Moving on to the town planners report. I also see none, but you have anything to add, Mr. Dumais?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a report per se, but I did want to follow up on a discussion item that we had that was raised by Commissioner Gillette at our last meeting, and that was to explore low-impact development techniques and stormwater management more generally. Since that time, I have reached out to NEMO. It's a program, Center for Land Use Education and Research out of UConn, and they appear to be willing and able to provide us with some training that I think could be quite interesting. I talked to our chairman earlier today, and I think what I'd like to do is get more information on the type of resources and training they'd be able to provide, and then possibly scheduling either maybe right after or before our December meeting, carving out some time to do that as part of our December meeting to talk about a training session around that topic. I think there could be a lot of value for the agency in that process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. Mr. Prestige.
Todd, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, would you, so I think as you and Mr. Hearn know, my interests is in my waning days is to move forward at least a couple of initiatives from the POCD, which was passed 2 years ago now. Just to be blunt, I mean, come on, guys, nothing's happened. I understand COVID, I get that, but there was a couple of things we were going to talk about. One was the low impact development, reviewing practices here in town. I would like if you could touch base on what the status of POCD initiatives are for this commission, particularly that one.
That would be to bring to our next meeting. Is that correct?
You can give me an update now, or you can give me.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if you was
Or
going
you can bring it to the next meeting. I mean, I imagine you're working on it, but.
I didn't fully appreciate the depth of the question, but our POCD has been only 15 months, 16 months since it's been adopted, not a full 2 years, just to not scare us. It was adopted at the end of May in 2020. Was your question limited to POCD initiatives around this topic or all topics?
Specifically, so two. One would be for this topic, and the second one would be for the initiatives in which this board or commission is involved.
We had talked about a housing inventory, for instance, and a number of other things.
Sure. So remember, the POCD is a broad framework for moving a town towards the combined vision of the document. There are a number of other groups and entities and commissions working towards those actionable items. I can try to pull many of the several dozen of which have already been achieved and bring those back to you. We talked about doing that in an annual report, and then highlight some of the ones we talked about. That housing study, you remember at our commentary last week, there's an affordable housing task force that's actually working on that exact issue. They've been formed by the town manager, and Mr. Pudlick and myself are staffing them. They're going to start to do that work, so we'll have reports to bring back to you in the coming months on that issue. But that in and of itself is going to take us several months to work with that group on. So that action is being done. So I think to our chairman's suggestion, I can bring back a status report of different activities that already have begun or been completed. There's some activities that we've already, believe it or not, done that have been suggested action items or strategies that have been achieved, or some that are certainly ongoing, and we can report back to ongoing initiatives. So I'm happy to do that, Mr. Prestige.
So just to clarify, so one, yeah, it's been a crazy 15 months, right? I certainly get that. But what I'd like to know is specifically about this one initiative that we had talked about. And then I would specifically like to know about the other initiatives that this body's working on. I certainly was a part of putting the document together. So I certainly understand that there are other bodies that are working on the other action items in this document. And it's not possible for us to be involved with every single activity, nor should we be. We know that. At least I should say I do. Any questions on what I'm looking for?
No, I think the answer is simple. The commissioners request last month is starting an official process on this topic. So that is the update. We kick off some research and education around it. That's the start of it. Behind the scenes, staff had been working on evaluating some of our regulations in terms of requiring more stringent stormwater design controls that are related to stormwater management and low impact development. But I think with respect to this actionable item, I think if we set up a framework and have some discussions, training, and then a path forward about different options of how we can address those, that would be the start of that specific activity.
Okay, so that actually answers my question. So I don't need a follow-up. So it looks like it's already begun. You guys have already been exploring it. Then that's what I was interested in. So no additional work. Although that said, Mr. Chairman, if you want to track these activities, certainly willing to follow along with you. So
thank you, Mr. Prestige. Yeah, and I appreciate the follow-up, because I think that is important that we be checking in. Obviously, I don't want to be breathing down his neck every month, but every a period of a particular period, I think is appropriate for to be checking in on the POCD projects that were set forward.
So just as a reminder, our POCD included one of the suggested action implementation items to create an annual report. We did not do it last year, but it will be planned to report back to the TPZ and all of the actions and what's in progress or yet to be in progress. And so that's something that we had planned on providing the agency. I think it's supposed to be done in January. So that's something that we are working on and tracking, Mr. Prestige.
Yeah, it's been a crazy 15 months. A little bit of extra outdoor dining that you guys had to work on too, right?
That's right.
So.
All right. Ms. Gillette.
Yeah, and I just want to say, thank you for moving forward on some of that, Mr. DeMay. I've done my own internet research and of course have no way of evaluating what's crazy and what isn't. So hearing part of this is just learning. And I'm hoping perhaps after the first of the year, it can take place in a workshop format with us actually in a room with flip charts, etc. And I'm because I want to know more about it. I want to know what's possible, and I want to know what's something that you read about that worked in Iowa that just doesn't make sense here and why. And I appreciate you working on that. Rhode Island, for instance, looks great, but they're built on sand, not clay. That kind of thing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. Mr. Prestige.
An additional item, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Prestige.
Sure. There's a wetland permit that's outstanding at on Brayburn Road. I believe it's construction that had begun, had stopped suddenly. There was a storm this summer, and from what I understand is the site itself wasn't secure enough to contain all of the things on it, and they were blown downstream. I believe the town worked with some of.
This was the brook by the cemetery?
Oh, yeah. I should say that just recently in the last week or two, a tree fell down, and they've actually put a cofferdam around the stream there. They put looks like kind of a wooden plywood 2x4 kind of walkway over, outside the fence line for people to work on. I think the tree had fallen and knocked that down, and that's been insecure. Not too sure where the erosion and sediment controls are, but if you could look into that application and to take a look and see if the applicant is doing everything they need to secure that site, that'd be fantastic. It's definitely looking forward to that wetland being restored to permitted, pre-construction or what we look for is the post-construction conditions. So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Prestige. Mr. DeMay, you any questions on the request from Mr. Prestige?
Nope, I think it's pretty clear.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. DeMay. Then I don't see anything in information items, Mr. DeMay. Anything to add?
No, sir.
All right. Just note that our next meeting is scheduled for December 6th, 2021. It'll be our last meeting in this year, which went by really quickly. So with that, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Prestige.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn. Any discussion? I don't think there is any discussion on a motion to adjourn, so let me try your minds. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Bye.
Those opposed. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Take care. We'll see you in December.
Thank you, Todd.
Night.